So somehow the month of May has come and gone, and it's time for another monthly wrap up where I just quickly go through and discuss the books that I read and what I ended up rating them and my thoughts on my reading for the month. So this month in May, I chose my TBR in multiple different ways. I spent 1 week where I only read off my list of most anticipated books. I spent another week where I tried to get a bingo in a readathon, and in my third week of May that I did a TBR, I let AI generate the reading list for me. Let's see how the month went. Per usual, I will start with the books that I DNF'd this month, and then I will go all the way up through my star ratings to my 5-star reads. As we go along, I will put the picture of any books I do not currently still own on the screen so you can see what those are. And let's go ahead and get started because there's a lot to go through. So let's start with the books that I DNF'd this month. And those would include Shirley by Charlotte Bronte, Three Men on the Bummel by Jerome, and Quo Vadis. All three of these books were DNF'd or soft DNF'd for a variety of different reasons, usually just having to do with mood, or sometimes just because I flat out didn't like the books. If you're interested in hearing more specifically about my thoughts on each of those books, you can go ahead and check out my previous weekly reading wrap ups, where I discuss each of the reasons that I DNF'd these in more detail. Amazingly, this month, other than the books that I DNF'd, all the rest of my books this month were 4 or 5-star reads. And I've really got to think about why that is. My 4-star reads included The Englishman Who Posted Himself by John Tingey. This book covered the story of a man in England, and I forget his last name, but his first name was Reginald. I'll put his whole name on the screen. And this book talked about his postal activities, if you will, where he decided to pick up the postal guide like early on, I think when he was 18, and he spent a vast majority of the rest of his life just seeing like what the limitations and what the expectations were of the postal system by just mailing a whole bunch of things. He also had an autograph collection and a whole bunch of other stuff. There are lots of visuals in this book, and I really enjoyed reading it. The only reason it ended up being a 4-star for me really just had to do with the fact that I expected the book itself to be more quirky and witty than it was, and so I personally just found that a little disappointing. I also gave 4 stars to The Rain Heron by Robbie Arnott. This is a really intriguing and mysterious book that is told from multiple perspectives where you're following different characters and a rain heron just trying to figure out what is really happening in the world that they live in. I think the reason this book got a 4-star for me was I just didn't have enough of the mystery unraveled, and I was left feeling like I still had a lot of questions. That said, it was still a wonderful story. The writing was great. The scenery and imagery was very unique and inventive. And I just thought it was a unique and intriguing story overall. And I would still really recommend it to people who like a lot of symbolism and motifs in their book and don't like all the questions in their books answered. I also read How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House by Cherry Jones. This was a book that had been on my reading list for quite a while, along with The Rain Heron, and it lived up to my expectations. I realize not every book can be a 5-star, but I always appreciate it when I get some good 4-star reads, and this was definitely one of them. It was a well-paced story that moved quickly through the life of Lala, and really, I think, kind of like the opening pages, was sort of a cautionary tale and almost a thriller in some ways. It was just really interesting story of a young woman's life and her trying to find her way out of the maze of consequences that she's made for herself. The one book that I still have to show you, in fact, there's 2 books that I still have to show you that were 4 stars, and one of them was The Tale of Genji Manga edition. And this was a 4-star for me because it started to have some spelling mistakes and it got distracting in that sense. In every other way, I really enjoyed this story. However, the illustrations are absolutely beautiful and wonderful, and it really does a great job in under 200 pages capturing a lot of the wonderful highlights that are in the tale of Genji, as well as sort of subtly pointing out a lot of the issues that were going on in court life during that time period. And my final 4-star read is The Arabian Nights. Yes, yes, I have finished this book. Okay, Let me be honest. As of the date that I am recording this, I have not finished this book. However, I know I will be done with this book before the end of May, so I'm counting it in May. I have earned this. The Arabian Nights, this is the Malcolm Lyons translation, and I have really enjoyed this translation so far. I think the major thing that has stopped it from being a four for me is one, in this particular volume, there is a large section in the middle that just got really repetitive and kind of on the boring side. I just didn't feel as invested in the stories as I wanted to. And probably the other thing I would say that has to do with this translation is there's a lot of poetry in this book. And while overall I feel like this translation is really clear, very easy to read, when it gets to the poems, they're kind of clunky and they're just not good. I have to be honest. They're not my favorite part of the book. I'm not a huge poetry lover, but I don't find the way they translated the poems leave them very lyrical or feeling like poetry in any way whatsoever. And because there's so much poetry throughout this entire book, it makes huge chunks of it just sections that I decided to skim. That said, it didn't prevent me from reading the book. Honestly, it probably made it a slightly faster read for me, but it has made me want to read the complete Arabian Nights in another translation as well, so that at least for the stories that are my favorite, I can get better poetry in them. Since I have not finished this book yet, technically, at least not as the day of recording this, I will wait to do a longer review on this book and discuss what my favorite stories were in it until June. And so I guess if you want to see that, you'll need to wait for the weekly wrap up where I actually talk about finishing this book. My final four-star read is actually The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. And this was a really tough one. If you saw my weekly wrap up on this, I went back and forth about whether to give this book 4 or 5 stars. And at the end of the day, when I lined it up next to all the rest of my 5-star reads from this month, that was basically what decided it for me. This book, I'm going to rate a really high 4 stars. It was a really interesting book, and it was a story that I found both, gripping and moving and that held my attention. That said, I did listen to the entire book on audio, and I have heard some people have found that this book is really slow paced, and it does make me wonder if I read a physical edition of the book, if I might not have enjoyed it as well. The other reason it's a 4-star book for me is because I also just can't honestly see myself rereading this book. So those things together, as well as the stack of 5-star reads I had, made me go, yeah, maybe this book's gotta go. Or at least maybe this book needs to be a 4-star instead of a 5-star. So that brings me to my 5-star reads. And one of the things that you'll notice is that I do have all of my 5-star reads, at least I should have all of my 5-star reads here and available to me. And that's because at this point, particularly because I'm moving, I am only keeping my 5-star reads to move with me. All the 4-star reads I know are books that I will likely not reread. And so for now, I am letting them go, and I have already gotten them out of my life and returned and taken them to the used bookstore and turned them into cash or credit. So in no particular order, let me talk about the 4 books that I gave 5 stars to. And for each of these books, I will give a quick summary of what they're about and why they were a 5-star for me. The first book is John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. This tells the story of Linny and George, 2 friends who are both working as migrant farmers, and they are finding it a more than difficult life as they are forced to move from town to town and farm to farm. And at the beginning of this book, they arrive at a new location and they're trying to make a good start and finally start making some headway towards realizing their dreams. At this location, they run into a variety of different characters who are also experiencing their own struggles in realizing their dreams. This book explores hope, loneliness, and just commitment to friends and friendship. And this was a marvelous read that I would recommend to anyone who would like to try a short American classic and or would just like to try Steinbeck. I thought the writing in this was absolutely amazing. The characterization was great. There's really not anything bad that I have to say about this book. In a totally different genre, I also read and gave 5 stars to The Martian by Andy Weir. This was a really, like, surprise read for me. I knew it was hyped on BookTube, but I don't read a lot of science fiction, but this was just a great, fast-paced, fun book that really took me by surprise just in terms of how it was written, the perspectives, and the science and engineering that went into the reading and the writing of this book. I don't think I've read a sci-fi in a while that was quite as much fun and as entertaining as this read was. I think this is a great introduction for science fiction to someone who is not sure whether or not they would like it, as there's enough to enjoy in this book without getting too bogged down in the math or science if you don't want to. And it also has a movie adaptation, so what's not to like about that? I guess I didn't tell you what that book is about. In short, without spoiling anything, it's about a man who goes on a mission to Mars with a group of people and suddenly finds himself stuck there and having to figure out how to survive and escape. The next five-star read was The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. And at this point, Wilkie Collins, for me, it's almost a given that his books are going to be 5 stars, but you never know. I haven't given all 4 of his, quote unquote, great novels 5 stars, but this one I definitely did. This was a reread for me, and I loved it. I have to admit that the beginning of the book was a little bit difficult for me to get into, but not a large portion of the beginning of the book, probably just like the first 30, 40 pages or so. And given the length of this book, that isn't that long. And yeah, I tabbed the crap out of this. I really enjoyed reading this book. It's also, in my opinion, a beautiful edition. And per usual for Wilkie Collins, there was mystery, there was intrigue, there were great characters, there were lots of different perspectives told, and you just really get involved in the lives of these characters and you really get wrapped up in trying to figure out how everything is going to end, how everything is going to come together. And by the last 100 pages of this book, I just simply could not put it down. You are following the story of Walter Hartwright, who is an art teacher, as he goes to meet the Fairleys and teach the 2 sisters how to paint. But before he can leave to even go on that journey from London, he runs into a mysterious woman dressed all in white in London in the middle of the night, who is urgently on her way to somewhere. And it's not just that encounter that becomes the mystery, it's the fact that she becomes a reoccurring person in his life. And he spends quite a bit of the remainder of the book trying to uncover who she is, why she keeps coming up, where she went, and what, if anything, he should do about it. I loved this book. I think it is probably one of the books of Wilkie Collins that I think is the most well written by him, though I can say it's not where I would suggest starting with his work because it is a bit denser in the writing style than some of his other works. That said, if you haven't read The Woman in White yet and you enjoy Wilkie Collins, I highly recommend it. My final 5-star read was William Styron's Nat Turner 10 Black Writers Respond. This was a really quick essay collection where 10 writers literally respond to the character in and the book that William Styron wrote called The Confessions of Nat Turner. And this was a very thoughtful collection of 10 essays where they really just go through a lot of the elements of the book and just the issues that they personally, and they think other people, and particularly the Black community, as well as just people in general, would, did, and maybe even should have with the novel that William Styron wrote. They both course correct some of the things that are there. They point out things that they say were just flagrant untruths and lies against history. And they also get into the things that they just thought just weren't helpful to where things were in the US at the time, as well as things that were just not helpful to the American and general population's view of African Americans. And they also defend what at that time, and in some ways still is, a historical figure that was very much revered in the African American community and question his motives and premise in writing the book. Both books, I think, can be very difficult to read, but I think those 10 essays are worth every single minute that you spend on them. So, those are all the books that I read in the month of May. I finished 10 books total, and I will put on the screen the total number of pages that I read. So, I did go over my typical 3,000 pages a month goal. So, I'm really happy about that. So, before I move on to my final thoughts and conclusions for this month, I also have like one or two other things that I want to wrap up. Each week this month, I mentioned that I had chosen a different TBR. So, I want to go through real quick one by one and talk about my thoughts on how each of those weeks went. So, one week I spent reading off my 24 and 24 list. I think that was one of my more successful weeks. I finished two books that week, and the books that I read that week were The Woman in White and The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. One of them got a 5 star, the other one was super close to being a 5 star read. So that really confirmed to me that I really am choosing some books that I think I will like and that my instincts are pretty well and correct on that. The second week, I read from the Readathon TBR and I used a little bingo board to kind of represent how I was doing. So I have here on the screen for you the little bingo board that I was using, and I will cross out for you all the books on there that I actually finished off of this. So I haven't looked at it yet, so you tell me, did I get a bingo? I I'm pretty sure I got at least one. So that was really fun, and I think I'm gonna try incorporating a little bingo board into my month more often. But I think I also need to print it out so I can keep track of where I'm at in it. And then the final TBR for the month that I chose was using a generated one from Storygraph Up Next. I used their suggestions there as well as just one random pick that they had to create a TBR. And I didn't actually end up reading that much off of that TBR, unfortunately, but it was primarily because a lot of the books on there were just really long books that I happened to choose because it wasn't choosing books based on length, it was choosing books based on other interests that I might have. I have to say I was really intrigued by that list of books and they were ones that I was all very excited about reading. However, the main thing was just, time. And so I only read two books off of that list, but both the books were 4 stars. So to me that was pretty good. The rest of that week I basically just mood read and tried to, go through other books and didn't read anything unless I felt like it. And that actually produced a whole bunch of 5 star books for me, but partially because I also just slashed and dashed a whole bunch of books off my TBR list. And I was like, I don't want to read that right now. That brings me to my final thoughts for the month of May. DNF a lot and as frequently as possible. So that is my plan going forward. And if you are a person who does not DNF and you finish every book you start, give it a try. Start DNFing more. Here's your permission if you feel like you needed it. I give you permission to just stop reading and give up on books as much as you want. There is no book police who's going to come along and point out to you all the books that you didn't finish. You can even get them out of your life. Like, sell them to somebody else to read. That'll be a great use for them, and you can buy more books if you do that. But in my experience, at least for this month, DNFing all those books, and there were four in total, not including the books I just decided not to start, can really lead to a lot more reading fun. At the same time, am I going to stop making TBRs? No, because it gives me a good place to start, and my mood can change a lot, and at least I have something to look at before moving on. But it is making me think that I'm, again, not going to stick too closely to the books that I'm laying out and saying that I need to read. If I decide I want to read something else, I can, because you know what? Reading is supposed to be fun, and this is what makes it fun for me. So that's it for May. June is coming up pretty quick. In June, I've got a lot of fun things and scary things going on. You will see my final owned TBR, where it's a list of all the books that I want to read before I move. On to the exciting and fun stuff. In June, I am also going to host a read along for Things Fall Apart. So that will be happening on June 8th. All day that day, I will be live streaming and reading Things Fall Apart. There will be a storygraph read along that you can participate in, and it's sure to be a good time. The way I do my read alongs, it's always a read at your own pace. We're just going to all be there. We're going to be hanging out, sharing our excitement. And on the storygraph read along, we will be sharing spoilers, but it's nice the way it's set up because you won't get spoiled until you reach the same spot in the book that everybody else was at when they left their comments. So that's it for today. Let me know how May went for you as a reading month and tell me what one of your 5-star reads were. So maybe I'll add that to my list. And I will talk to you next time.